inside the church, which is why I'm using my church voice. So we are back on setting out at the moment, so I'm not going to be in the workshop for a few weeks because we have another scheme of setting out to do. So setting out just means the drawing of the stones and making the templates for the stones so that we've got templates to work from. So as I'm going to be setting out for the next few weeks, I'm going to film a few things, take you guys with me, talk you through the process. So these next few stones that I'm going to show you are 2 voussoirs. And in case you're wondering, this is what a voussoir is. It's these stones that make up an arch, so these kind of wedge-shaped stones, these are called voussoirs. So I had 2 voussoirs to set out on the chapter house. So as with my other videos, I have filmed the process. I just set my phone up and get on with my job. I don't talk through doing the job as I'm doing it. I just set my phone up and get on with my job. So there will be voiceover in this where I will explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. We still set out by hand. We don't use CAD. We don't have 3D scanners. Everything is done by hand. So hopefully by the end of this video, you will all know how to set out a couple of replacement voussoirs for your cathedral. Okay, voiceover Rachel here. You join me from the scaffold where I'm going to be setting out for these 2 voussoirs that are looking a little bit weathered and a little bit lumpy. So those are going to be getting replaced. Got my giant pencil case courtesy of the lovely people at Velocity who sent me a lovely rucksack to carry all of my heavy tools in. And this is the obligatory view off the scaffold, because if you're going to ever film anything on a scaffold, you always have to show the view. So I think at this point I'm going to set up my phone and just film myself getting on with my job. So let's see how that goes. All of the most involved stones that I seem to have to replace always seem to be in the corner of the scaffold, right where there's a scaffold pole, so you have to kind of pretzel yourself in. Now, I am going to try and explain what I'm doing as I'm doing it. I understand this is probably not the best angle for this, but I have made a video about this already. So in order to set out a voussoir, which is the curved wedged stone that goes into making up an arch, you need to find the striking point of the intrados of the arch. So the intrados is the internal curve. And that curve, if it carries on all the way, will eventually become a massive circle. So essentially, we need to find the centre of that circle to find the radius and the striking point of that arch, so I can recreate that curve up in the setting out room. Now there is a little bit of algebra that helps with this. So in order to get the measurements I need to do that equation, we need to strike a chord. So you do a line that hits from point to point on the curve, and then at the center of that line with a little set square, measure the distance from the center of that line, represented in this case by my black spirit level, to the internal soffit of the arch. Is this making sense? It will all become clear, I promise. Now, sometimes when setting out old stones, in order to calculate things like the profile of the stone, the kind of overall shape of it, in order to get the depth, we need to do a little bit of chopping out. So I have a little chisel and a little mallet that I can use to remove some of the old cement. Obviously, the Victorians have been up here, so there's some big old chunks of cement that might be getting in the way of the joints, that might make it harder to calculate the height of the stone because there's so much mortar smeared over the joint. So I'm just removing some of that mortar so that I can calculate point to point where I think the joints might be on my curve. And I am, of course, writing all of this down in my handy dandy notebook. The trick is to get every single measurement that you could possibly need, and then a few measurements that you might not even think you're going to need. Measure everything 3 times in 3 different ways, put all the information in the book, because by the time I get down off the scaffold, walk around the cathedral, up a turret, and I'm in the roof of the cathedral in the setting out room, you know that I will have forgotten the single most important measurement, and I'll have to go all the way back up there again. So I'm using rulers and set squares here to calculate the depth of the soffit, see how far back to the wall line it goes. I want to see if the face of the stone is square to that internal soffit of the stone, because obviously it would make sense if these stones were square blocks that had just had the corner boshed off and then the moulding worked, because that, in my mind, would be the easiest way to work this stone. But unfortunately, in cathedral world, that is not always the case. So sometimes we are replacing stones that went in not square, But in order to make the newer stones match the stone above and the stone below, we therefore have to recreate that discrepancy, because if we put in a stone that is perfect, that is how we think in our minds it should be, then we'll end up with a stone that stands out like a sore thumb and looks completely different to the ones around it. So sometimes you are replicating those medieval mistakes in order to make the stone match seamlessly the weathered stones around it. And this section of the cathedral and these stones that I'm replacing are about 700 years old, so there's a lot of weathering and a little bit of movement. So it is part of the fun of it, is figuring out how you're going to make this new stone look correct and look new, but also match the weathered stones that are either side of it. So now that I've calculated the internal curve, the striking point of the curve of this arch, now that I've calculated where the joints are, the overall size of the blocks, whether they're square, how far they protrude from the building, all of that stuff, now comes the really technical part, guys, and this is peak cathedral masonry, where you need cereal boxes and pizza boxes. The card from cereal boxes and the card from pizza boxes are an elite piece of stonemasonry kit. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my profile gauge, which honestly, this profile gauge is rubbish. I really need to get a new one. I've been looking online at better ones than this, but this is what I have to make do with at the moment. So I use my profile gauge. I find the next nearest, most intact medieval stone, so something where the moulding is still as crisp as it can be after 700 years. And I take reverses of this moulding. I draw it out on my pizza box or my cereal box, and then I create a large cardboard reverse, which I can then offer up to the moulding and see if I can get it to match perfectly. I can then take that up to the drawing room and recreate that moulding and try and make it neater and make it a bit more precise. And then I will keep coming up and down with various different reverses of various different shapes to see which one matches the stones above and below the best. Now this bit requires quite a lot of finagling. It's quite fiddly in order to get the perfect reverse in order to take up to the drawing room. So let's just speed this up, shall we? Also, I work with all boys, so there seems to be just an endless supply of pizza boxes and cereal boxes. I don't know why. And then I hot-foot it back up to the setting out room. And I know what you're thinking, is that a normal sized rucksack on a teeny tiny girl, or is that a normal sized girl with a massive rucksack? And you may never know. Right, that's quite enough organ practice. Let's do some maths. So the equation that I mentioned at the beginning of this video that we use to calculate the radius of our curve is this: a squared plus b squared over 2 times b, where a is half the length of the chord struck along the curve, and b is the line drawn at a right angle straight up the centre of that chord. And this gave me the radius of about 2 meters, which is pretty spot on. That's quite satisfying. And just want to really confuse my American viewers, I'm absolutely not beyond measuring things in meters, centimeters, and inches at the same time. I think that's perfectly all right. Now, we're very lucky to have this space up in the triforium level of the cathedral. People have asked me before if this has always been the setting out room. No, this is relatively new. So this space, until about a decade ago, was the artist in residence studio in the cathedral, because they always had one of those. And we haven't had one for about a decade. But when our setting out room in our works yard was actually converted into a staff canteen over COVID times, and then when we all came back to work after that, we needed a setting out room. For about 2 years, I was actually using the plumber's workshop because he has a huge lead casting bench. But that was not ideal, having to do lots of clean drawings around a plumber who was trying to cast lead. not the best. And then eventually we persuaded the cathedral to allow us to use this artist in residence studio, and it is amazing. Luckily the joiners came up and built this huge table for us as well, and I might have made Craig carry that 1930s bureau all the way up the turret as well because I needed somewhere to keep my bits. So yeah, I love this space so much. Also, I'm obsessed with stationery, so I just really wanted to show you guys my little cathedral pen pot. How good is this? Right, I think we should probably at this point start some drawing. So first things first, we bosh a big line up the centre. This is my base line. And then I start to calculate the moulding. So this is what I'm doing here, cutting out a section of the moulding. Oh guys, the pigeon problem is getting ridiculous. Look, he's up there. There's 3 of them kicking about today. And he's right above me. And he's been on that wall up there on that ledge, just literally kicking mortar and bits of rubble down on top of me. Not great. Might have to start wearing a hard hat in the setting out room at this rate. Also, there's hundreds of bats up there, so hopefully it doesn't wake up the bats, because that's not ideal. Oh, there he goes. Ugh. Right, I've drawn my section. That's what this is. We've got the face, the soffit, and then obviously the stone has to go back into the wall a certain amount, so it'll go back that much. Our little cavettos, little chamfer cavettos. So because that is the bottom bed mould that will be applied to the bottom of the stone and like worked through, obviously you have to imagine, because it's an arch, it's voussoirs, so it kind of curves up. So the radius I figured out is pretty much bang on 2 meters. So normally, if it was longer than 2 meters, I would have to get out the big stick. Around here, got these big bits of wood, really important stick, that we can put trammel heads on. So we can do up to about 6 meters maybe, 6 meter long curves with these. I don't think I need, do I need to get these out? I might be able to get away with using a 2 meter spirit level and just boshing some trammel heads on it, and I might be able to get away with doing it on the table, so we'll see. I need a 2 meter curve. Let's go. It's at this point that I decided to film myself getting my trammel heads out, in case you guys don't know what trammel heads look like, so here they are. So it turns out that the 2 meter spirit level wasn't in fact long enough, so I did need to utilise the really important stick. And so to start with, I needed to draw a baseline from the point at which I wanted to start my curve straight along to exactly 2 meters, which was almost right on the edge of the table. I got incredibly lucky. So once I'd measured that line from my starting point, so I knew exactly where I was striking from, I could then put the trammel heads on my really important beam compass stick and bosh it into the edge of the table. Also, you absolutely do have to be on the table for this to work. In the perfect world, this would all be done on the floor, on a tracing floor, but we have this big table, so I have my special table slipper socks that I utilise just for this. And then I am clearing the runway so that I can strike my curve, and I think this went pretty smoothly. And then just adjusting the trammel heads to the outside of that bottom bed moulding that I made so I can get the extrados as well as the intrados, so internal and external curves. So at this point in the setting out, I have been up and down the scaffold a couple of times with a reverse of my moulding, with a reverse of the intrados, that internal curve, to hold it up against the stones that are already there to make sure it definitely all matches, it'll definitely all fit. So now I'm completely happy with my drawing, which I've been doing in pencil. I can ink, I use my ink bow on my beam compass in order to ink the final drawing so that I don't confuse the final drawing with my working lines. And then from this, I can create a template. Now for this particular mould, because it's just a bit of a one-off and it's actually quite a simple moulding, I am going to use plastic. We sometimes use zinc, we sometimes use plastic depending on the moulding and how many times this template is going to be used. So I've laid my plastic over the top, taped it down, and then traced the lines through. This will then get cut out and this template will go down to the workshop. Right, you lot, pay attention. I'm using my church voice, obviously, because I'm in the church. I am just about to leave, but I thought I'd give you guys a quick rundown on how this has all ended, how it all looks. So we did took the measurements, done the drawing. So the drawing is, don't know if you can tell, but the black biro, kind of black pen line here. This is our bed mould, so the bottom bed and the top bed, represented by this template. This is the template that will go down to the workshop. And then because it is a voussoir, which means it's curved, we need a face mould for each one to represent that curve, so the mason can create that curve in the stone before applying the top and bottom bed to create the moulding. And that is what these are. So we have V1, so we've got the intrados, which is the inside curve, the extrados, which is the outside curve, top bed, bottom bed, stone code. This is the face template, top bed, bottom bed template, and then there are job cards to go with each one. So when a stonemason is in the workshop, they will grab a job card, find that stone on a pallet, which will be sawn 6 sides like a nice square block. They'll find the corresponding templates, and then they can take that and work the stone. And that is how it happens. Couple of interesting little things. So when you're setting out a voussoir, so you have to obviously get the block sizes. So that's what this is. This is my cutting list. So this is the list that goes down to the cutting facility for the sawyer to use to cut the rough blocks to apply the templates to. So if this was just a straight through moulding, we would have our length, our width, and then we could get the height, and that would be easy peasy. Because this is a voussoir, to get the length, so that's the distance across the face of that voussoir as you're facing it, it's not just that, because it curves this way, so we have to square a line down here and measure from here, because that square block that comes from the cutting facility won't have that bend in it, so it needs to be wide enough to be able to get that curve on the face of the stone. Does that make sense? We've all done it. We've all made the mistake of just measuring that and going, oh, that's the length, that. And actually, you need to add a bit more to make up for that curve. So yeah, there we go. Right, now I'm going to safety pin all these together, take them down to the workshop and tidy up. Need to put fresh plastic over the table because it's been particularly pigeony today. There's been some powerful air strikes going on in here. So that was that. I hope that all made sense. I hope it wasn't too boring. I am essentially just drawing shapes. How interesting can that be? So as always, if you would like to like and subscribe, I would very much appreciate it, but you don't have to, that's cool too. I've got lots of setting out coming up over the next few weeks. I'm going to be filming the whole process. I'm currently drawing this. Delicious. So I've got some tracery panels to do, so that'll be another video. So thank you for joining me in the setting out room. Okay, it's tea break at the moment, so I need to go get a cup of tea and then go back to work.